Welcome back, episode 5 edition with DR. Today we're meeting with Clayton Banks, co-founder and CEO of Silicon Harlem. Before we go ahead and kick that off, I just want to thank our sponsor one more time, RK Squared. This episode is brought to you by RK Squared. Flexible, transparent, on time and under budget, a fresh new approach to in-building. Let's start this conversation. So Clayton comes to us today from New York, as I mentioned, co-founder of Silicon Harlem. Clayton advocates for connectivity and pushing boundaries in broadband connectivity to bring equity to different zip codes. Clayton, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. It's great to be on an interview with Dennis, who has been dishing things for so long, and so much I've learned. So I'm so happy to be here and to share with everyone what we're doing.
Thanks again, Clayton, for making the trip over. Clayton's background in telecommunications, broadband, 5G wireless connectivity. You want to tell us a little bit about where you started and what Silicon Harlem is all about today?
Yeah, so for me, telecommunications is that sort of the fundamental that we all need to connect with. And I started my career in the cable industry, working for Showtime Networks, moving on to Comedy Central, and ended up working quite a bit in the advanced technology area of the business. Created my own company called Ember Media, which actually worked very hard to bring much more connectivity and more so education, digital literacy to the masses. And at some point I said, wow, what if we could literally go into some vulnerable populations like Harlem and New York City and figure out how we can literally move that community forward through a tech prism. So we created basically a tech ecosystem that involved both the educators, our universities. A lot of people don't realize there's 14 colleges in Harlem. We were able to sort of galvanize that community, the private sector, the public sector, our electives. And we also looked at our stakeholders, the YMCAs and the Boys and Girls Clubs and all of these organizations that touch people every day, and finally the people in general. And when we put that tech ecosystem, we finally saw how the community started to move, how the community really started to embrace technology as not only an essential utility, but also as an economic driver. And so for me, in my career, it's always been about how can we connect people. And when you think about that, that's really at the core of people, is to be connected. And now we are finally reaching a point in time, where I think we all realize the same, which is everyone needs a connection.
So you bring up an interesting point. I think sometimes connectivity is taken for granted, possibly by some, maybe not recognized by others, how important it can be. This digital divide, why do you think people are not connected? How do we solve this problem?
Well, fundamentally, telecommunications in general is really tough because the capital that's involved. There's a lot of money that has to go up to build out any type of telecommunication infrastructure. As a result of that, the price often has to be high in order to make your money back. And unfortunately, there's quite a few people that are not able to pay a monthly rate. The average bill in New York City is $150 a month. That's a lot for anybody. And so there's, in Harlem, for example, 40% of people don't have internet in the home. And when you hear that, 40% of people not having internet in the home, that is a tragedy. So one of the issues that has come with that, and we are evolving, is that we've always been looking at bundling and putting together a bunch of packages, and it tends to be just expensive. And that's why it's not so much of a digital divide. It's a wealth gap. And we'll talk more about that. But essentially what's happening is you can find the equipment, you have the infrastructure in your building or in your home. The question is, can you afford a monthly payment of $150 a month? And we're finding out that there's a lot of people that can't. Tribal lands, rural, Appalachians, dense urban inner cities all suffer from simply not having the kind of resources to have internet in the home. It's spotty. Sometimes they go on, they come off, they ruin their credit. The whole thing is a challenge. But we're reaching a point in time now where we're looking at, hey, what if we just do broadband only? Maybe that can bring down the cost. I think we're finding new ways to do that.
So if I understand you correctly, the broadband piece is an alternative that may solve not only the technical issue, but potentially the financial issue, which is a terrific step in the right direction to getting everybody connected. Before we go, like you mentioned, we'll talk more about the financial piece, but telecommunications, it is complicated. So how do you look to ensure that this connectivity can happen through broadband? What are you doing to bring that closer to a reality so that these people can take advantage of broadband infrastructure?
Well, one of the things that we focus on is New York City. We certainly, that's where a lot of our operations happens. However, it turns out that we can do a lot of our methodology in a lot of places. One of the things that we prioritize is being wireless, right? So we think that there's a movement moving forward of wireless connectivity, which would allow us to deploy faster and a lot less expensive. There's various types, you know this as well as anybody on earth, of the different types of radios that are being built out, the type of energy that's being built out, all these things that impact your capital costs when it comes to deploying a network. And we're not anti what the incumbents have done. We are happy to see that so many of them have connected so many people and have put so much money into our country. But like anything, things evolve. And we're finding that, my kids, your kids, and other kids around will never really subscribe because they can find content themselves. So you can let go of that video piece and be a broadband-only provider, and everyone can win. So I think if we look at from a fixed wireless perspective, or even just all wireless, I think we have an opportunity to bring the cost down dramatically. And there's no mystery in my mind, anyway, that at some point within the next 10 years, every single people will have a connection in the home. Within 10 years, 100% of people in America will have internet in the home with high speed, and it will be choices. One of the things we find in the country is that primarily in almost every state, you either have a monopoly or a duopoly. You don't have a lot of choices. So that also has kept a lot of people out of the internet space. So I think we have this great opportunity, Dennis, that we particularly can look at not only a great way of deploying a network, but an affordable way to get the network out there, and that's going to make everyone on. Look at Singapore, where they are upset if it's less than a gigabit of speed. I mean, the average is 2 gigabits in the home. Everyone has it, and they have choices. It can be up to 10, 12 choices for them to choose there on the same transom to decide their provider. So these are the things that America has to look forward to.
Well, that's encouraging to say the least. So it's unfortunate that today, 2021, there are still gaps in the telecommunication and broadband space. So it sounds like what you're saying is your company is focusing on bringing a better technological solution to solve that gap, but also, when I say better, it's a more affordable financial solution solving that gap. And through that, your prediction, if I heard you correctly, is that all homes will be connected to the internet within a few years.
Yeah, within 10 years, not only connected, but using it, right? So a lot of infrastructure is out there, but the reality is that's been a little bit too expensive to stay on and all these other things. So I think within 10 years, and it's a prediction, and everyone can write it down, Clayton Banks, Silicon Harlem, has literally said, within 10 years, everyone will have an active connection in the home, just as they do with water. And if you look at what we're looking at, even from a governmental perspective, and you hear now this wonderful word of 21, which is infrastructure. That's the hot name of 2021 is infrastructure. And some of them are saying that broadband is infrastructure. Well, if you're going to call broadband infrastructure, as you do with a highway, there's a whole new way to make sure everyone gets it. Now, that may not make us all billionaires anymore like it used to, but it's going to be essential, and that's why this prediction is so realistic.
So, speaking of prediction, you heard it here on Dishin with DR. It brings to my mind three great predictors. Joe Namath, Super Bowl III, New Yorker. Mark Messier, 1994 Stanley Cup, New Yorker. And now Clayton Banks, a technological guru, predicting that everybody will be connected in the next 10 years. So you heard it here first. Mark it down on your calendar.
I'm in good company there. I'm in good company there.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So in order for you to make and understand the market and make that type of prediction, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Silicon Harlem has done in terms of test beds and things that you're already doing that give you the insight into what the community needs and how they're going to take advantage of it or what they need to take advantage of it?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that. This is another good, just with DR, is that we actually do embrace research to drive a lot of our activity. So we've been able to partner with key universities around the country. And one of the outcomes was to build out the very first public test bed for 5G. Never been done before. And we were able to do that in an area called Harlem, which is rare that Harlem would have something like this happen. So it still stands up to this day. We built it in 2018. And we are not only using it as to test out these radios, small cells, medium cells, and large cells, but we also have the wherewithal to go, what if we were able to share sort of the concepts of this advanced research on wireless activity with kids? Like maybe there's schools within the area that we have this test bed. What if we could show them various types of curriculums or how they could utilize this infrastructure? Now, why I say that? Big companies are coming to us saying, hey, we'd like to run something on your test bed. Everybody wants to run something on a 5G test bed. And by the way, we're starting to work with 6G too. And so these big companies, the biggest ones you can think of, are all like, hey, we've been needing a test bed like that. And we love it. We let them all have access. They can try out different types of radios, applications, etc. Well, the young people in our district where our test bed lies, we actually give them access to tools and curriculum with their teachers. We train the teachers, whether they're math teachers or science teachers or tech teachers, and they get to literally see how wireless activity is growing. But more importantly, Dennis, is that a young person in a high school can go, hey, Mr. Banks, I'd like to run this application on the test bed. And, because us kids are trying to find where the most, local restaurants that are friendly to teenagers or whatever. And all of a sudden we'll say, yeah, and they can run an application on our test bed right next to IBM. That's unprecedented. Because if you do that, you now have the future sort of locked in. These are now people that are going to be embracing this type of technology and not be mystified by it, and realize how they can make their communities even better as a result of this access to this type of research.
Well, sounds like tremendous progress. I believe that Silicon Harlem was founded on a revolutionary goal to transform Harlem and other urban markets into technology hubs, if you will. It sounds like progress has been made. More progress is needed to be made. Can you give us a snapshot of, some of the things that are actively going on today that start to bring that even closer, bridge that even closer? Are there projects out there that you're working with these universities on? Yeah,
there's a couple of things that I think would resonate with our audience here today and certainly beyond, which is, if you look at Harlem, we have built over the years, since 2015, the largest contiguous outdoor Wi-Fi network in the country. That's in Upper Manhattan. That kind of stuff never happened before. So for us to have built the largest contiguous outdoor Wi-Fi network in our country to this day is significant, because what we've been able to do, when you're on Wi-Fi anywhere, you got to switch your SSID, for those of the techies on the call, to get the next signal as, once you get out of a certain area. Don't have to do that in Harlem. You can stay on your mobile as long as you're walking within those 92 square blocks. And I think that's one of the things that we feel like, wow, we've made a big move, and at a certain level. You combine that with Cosmos, as you talked about, the 5G network that we have, test bed on Broadway between Columbia and City College, and We are right now also have an edge cloud computing setup in our office where we are testing, for example, how to bring the cost down of a computer. How? Well, using our edge cloud computing infrastructure, we actually utilize it, for those who are old enough to remember the word mainframe. So we actually use it as a way that people can log into our infrastructure, have all the software and services, meaning that they won't have to have processing power in their own computer. They can have the processing power in our edge cloud. What does that mean? A computer without process power is basically free. The whole cost is in a processing power that's in those computers. So you take that out, it becomes what we call a zero client, and they use that to log into our system, be able to still as if it's their own computer, and we can bring down the cost of devices. So when we talk about why people don't have the internet or why people are not digitally ready, oftentimes it might just be a cost when it comes to having a computer, which we believe everyone will also have in 10 years.
To me, it sounds like there's many moving pieces, of which you are looking for solutions to most, or if not all of them. You're looking at the financial aspect, the connectivity, the backhaul or the backbone or the broadband connection. You're looking at the end devices, how to make them more affordable, and ultimately how to make connectivity to those devices through some type of monthly fee more affordable or palatable for the people that need it. I've heard you use the word, and I've read in our conversations, proactive equity. Do you want to talk a little bit about that phrase? You're the first person I've heard, kind of use that phrase, and I'd like for you to maybe share a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Well, it's exactly what we should be doing in our country all the time and every time. What that really sort of looks at is, it's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to do something about it. So if we are saying that there's some gaps in education, right? So some schools are teaching around things like augmented reality or extended reality or quantum computing, which are essential for the future, and another school is not, that's inequitable. So we have to go, let's go help this school get the right tools, the right information, and perhaps even some of the right training so that they can offer the same levels of curriculum. Sometimes it's a money issue, but a lot of times it's just an education perspective. That's just one example. The same thing can look at businesses, how small businesses don't have a data center, for example, to back up their data or to be able to manage their business. Why would we allow that to happen? We have to be proactively looking at how do we bring that small business in an area where they're not getting that kind of service. How do we make sure they get that kind of service? Silicon Harlem has put a lot of focus on. That's why we built out a data center in Upper Manhattan. So there's a solution to that by being proactive. And once you do that, you'll find that people are less likely to fall to a pandemic, for example, to go out of business. So we believe that all of us have skin in the game at the end of the day. If you look at some of the social media outlets, if you look at any software out there, if you look at anyone who's delivering service, everyone has a skin in the game, that everyone has what they need to be able to be in the game. So we have to be proactive in order to make that happen.
I think I heard you say, maybe I read it, that access to wireless ultimately creates education around wireless, and ultimately that will help lead to opportunity, which solves possibly even like a poverty gap. Do you want to, that's a pretty, to me, that was a pretty big statement, pretty big thing to, kind of get my head around. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would love to. And you basically said it all, but I will frame it just a little more. So I believe that a lot of the ill in our cities and in our country, essentially, where we look at, inequity and things that just don't seem to be resonating properly, stems from one simple thing. So here's the good news. I'm going to tell you the problem, and I'm also going to tell you the solution. So the problem really, and I would think that everyone can agree to this, that if you do not have exposure, if you have a lack of exposure, it leads to a lack of access. If you have a lack of access, it leads to a lack of opportunity. If you have a lack of opportunity, everybody with me? If you have a lack of opportunity, it's a recipe for poverty, and it's cyclical. A perfect example, since I've been all over the world, I can name any country, and there'll be a lot of people who can say, yeah, I've been there, but there's probably a lot of people who've never been. I could say, for example, Panama or Cuba or Korea or any of these places, and I've had that exposure. So I was able to get that exposure, meet people there, and obviously that's some access. With that access, I noticed that there was an opportunity for me particularly in Korea, led to an opportunity that was a $500,000 contract. So I'm able to sustain as a result of that. So if you don't have that kind of, and not everyone needs to have the exact same amount of exposure, but people need exposure, particularly from an education perspective. If one school is offering certain things that is essential to the future, the other school ought to have that too. It's not an issue of intelligence. That's not the issue here. It is absolutely and never has been an issue of intelligence. It's always been an issue of access and exposure. So here's the solution. Very, very good solution and a simple one. More exposure. If you can give people more exposure, I guarantee that person can become sustainable and not somehow leaning on all types of other ways of getting through. They will take advantage. They will get the access. They will look at the opportunity. They will be able to benefit from that opportunity. They become sustainable. We all have had that to some degree, but not all of us have had it equally. And I'm not saying it's going to ever be equally, but we got to give people more exposure. Can I just add one more example? As a young kid, I grew up in an era where there was no internet and very few channels on television. And but one of the things my parents did is they bought an encyclopedia set. So I had the internet before the internet, right? So I would be like the only kid in the area that had an encyclopedia. So I had the best educational scores than any other kid in my class all the time. And I always thought, why am I getting all the best grades? And it turned out I had a resource that a lot of people didn't have. I had exposure. I had access. I took advantage of that opportunity, and I became sustainable, not only academically, but of course throughout my life. So that really is the essence of what you asked me.
Well, I mean, in working with you over the past few months and in talking to you and Dana and others in your office, I heard you say exposure just now. I heard you say connected. We've talked about connectivity quite a bit here. One of the things that I've learned or seen from your office is this is not only about technology, it's about the community, and your exposure and connectivity to the community through yourself and your team is phenomenal. I mean, I've seen it myself in doing site walks with you and your team, or just in talking to you about certain projects. Can you tell us just a little bit about, how you've developed this real connection with the community that ultimately is going to result in exposure to broadband and different types of resources?
Well, one of the things that is what you and I do in the era of technology is somewhat off-putting. It's almost like most people don't want to I don't really know much about technology, Clayton. I don't know what's going on here. And so I set out to set the company to be sort of a demystification type of company, right? We wanted to demystify technology because at the end of the day, whether it's connecting people, whether it's giving people more digital literacy, or even talking about devices, most of this stuff is just tools. I mean, you still have to humanize this stuff. You have to humanize it so that people go, oh, I was once having a great talk with senior citizens, and this was 4 or 5 years ago. And I said to them, what do you know about, coding? And it was funny because they were all like, what? And I said, but they understood that there were websites and somebody had to make them. And I said, you know what? Check it out. I said, has anyone here ever made a cake? Oh, yeah, I make cakes all the time. And I said, do you make them from scratch? Oh, yes, the only way we make them is from scratch. So you got these eggs and powder and stuff all over the butter and all this other stuff. It looks like a mess. But at the end of the day, after it's cooked, it looks beautiful and people want to eat it. That's all a website is a bunch of messy stuff put together and it looks nice on a screen. And it demystified it for them. They became less anxiety around it. Like, oh, I see. We can actually get a bunch of pieces, put it together, and something can happen. And I think that's one of the problems we've had in our business and telecommunications in general is not demystifying it for people. People don't know why it costs more, for example, to have higher speed. Why is it that I go from 300 megas to 600 megabytes of speed? Why do I pay more? Nobody's ever explained that, by the way, or or even with fiber. It's like, oh, why does it have a gigabit speed, and why do I have to pay more if I want 2 gigabit speed? Nobody talks about that, and we end up, sort of mystifying this stuff. Some of it's maybe from just a tech perspective, but some of it's from a economic perspective. And I think it's important that we prioritize the community, to your point. Prioritize them to where they can feel empowered around this stuff. Because I find that the more empowered the community is, the stronger my company gets. Because they then advocate for anything that we are looking to do. Because they trust us. And one of the things with the telecommunication industry hasn't built up the trust that we originally had. We had original trust in this business in the 90s. And it was just amazing and fundamentally great. But over the years, it's become less and less connected to those communities. And as a result, their trust is really low. And so it's opened up the door to a lot of other people to try to get in this space. And my perspective was, whatever success we ultimately have, we never want to lose the hand of the community and bring them through with us.
Well, over the past few months in getting to know you and getting to know Silicon Harlem, my personal opinion, I've seen those efforts. I've seen the effort in the technology, in the education, in the communication, the efforts in, I'll use the word lobbying to get more understanding, more acceptance, more push in the communities. So from my perspective, you and the team at Silicon Harlem are doing a great job. I look forward to being a part of it going forward in the near future and in the long-term future. And I really appreciate you coming over here today. I don't know if you have any closing words that you'd like to say on behalf of Silicon Harlem.
I certainly want to thank you for having us. I hope the audience out there has been able to get a little bit closer to what Silicon Harlem is all about. And I appreciate you, Dennis, having spent time with us. There's no better way to bond than to visit a basement together. So I really appreciate what you and your team has done for Silicon Harlem. And what I really am excited about, and I hope everyone gets a chance to hear or see this, is I'm really focused on the future. And as much as we are dealing with today's work that we have to do, I think about the future quite a bit, and I hope everyone can hear me. The good news is the future is bright. It's exceptionally bright. As well as we did in the 90s with telecommunications, this is the new era of the 90s we're in right now. Infrastructure is a thing across the world, and everyone in the world needs an upgrade. And so this is the one, maybe every 100 or 150 years, that we have an opportunity to get this done right. I call it what I call it, Dennis, is infrastructure for equity. We need to build out our next level of infrastructure that's going to work for everyone, differently abled, whether you're left-handed. All of these things have to be dealt with. And I'm excited to see that all of our voice can come to the table and make a better world by building infrastructure for equity. Thanks again, Dennis.
Clayton, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And this is episode 5 edition with DR. You can find it on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, all the different podcast channels. This episode was brought to you by RK Squared. Check them out at rksquared.net. Also, you can find us at Dishin with DR. And Clayton, if anyone wanted to look up some information on Silicon Harlem, where could they find you?
You can find us at siliconharlem.com. Siliconharlem.com. Not Silicon Valley, siliconharlem.com.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you on episode 6. Clayton, thanks again. Dana, thank you for making the trip. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.